Let me just go ahead and start. Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to another edition of our research seminar that is organized by the NUS Lloyd Register Foundation Institute for the Public Understanding of Risk, IPUR for short. My name is Leonard Lee. I'm the director of IPUR. And so just to say a few words about the background of this afternoon's research webinar. So on an annual basis, IPUR provides a couple of seed grants to researchers to support research pertaining to risk perception and risk communication. And so, as and when the researchers have results and insights, that are available, we organize these webinars to allow the researchers to share some of these insights with the wider audience. Right. So this afternoon, we are very privileged to have four speakers who are part of a team that works on a project supported by one of these IPUR seed grants. And we have with us this afternoon Dr. Dexter Lowe. So he's the Vice President for Social Development at Xavier University. We have Dr. Darren Chen, who is the Vice Dean for the College of Design and Engineering at NUS. Dr. Asana Vaturi, who is a research fellow in multi-hazard resilience of infrastructure systems at UCL, University College London, as well as Dr. Jiyoon Byun, who is a lecturer at James Watt School of Engineering at University of Glasgow. Right. So what these team of researchers has done is that they have actually developed a set of really wonderful, accessible, affordable decision support tools for infrastructure resilience. And as part of this project, they conducted training in the Philippines, specifically in the city of Cagayan de Oro. And so this afternoon, they're going to share with us the experience of conducting this training, as well as provide more insights into this decision support tools that they have developed for infrastructure resilience. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome our four speakers to share the insights with us. So we're going to try to do this until about 4:45, after which we'll save some time for Q&A, right? So let me first welcome Dr. Lowe to start the ball rolling. Dr. Lowe,
Thank
please.
you. Thank you, Dr. Lee. I will share my screen so we can start. I think my screen is working. Do you see that? Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So a little bit of overview and some risk profile of the study area where this project was done. So firstly, about 10 years ago, we did a study on the big schools, big public schools in the city. And the result was that at a lesser magnitude earthquake, these are the numbers of schools at risk. But in summary, so if there is a big earthquake that would probably hit the city, about 50% of the schools could be at high risk. So, but basically, this is not just structural, this also uh, describes or includes the functional vulnerability of the school buildings. And so that is why for many years, Xavier, together with some partners, we presented the results in conference. And fortunately, we met friends from De La Salle University and finally at UCL. And we did a project called SCOSO, basically to develop advanced multi-risk assessment frameworks and an app for school infrastructures in the country. And 2 years later, we proceed to another project called PRISM-H, basically to study on the possible or the probable building retrofit measures since we are able to identify the vulnerabilities from the former project. And we disseminated that to many stakeholders, even up to UCL. And so we continue this partnership. We now work under the umbrella of the UNESCO Chair for Disaster Risk Reduction and Resilience Engineering. And as a team, together with NUS and Glasgow, we submitted the proposal described earlier. And this project called affordable and accessible decision support tool against risk for local communities in developing countries. So basically, the project focuses on the affordability of risk mitigation measures. That's why we need to understand the challenges at the local level to see the case on point, and decision independence so that people in the ground, in the community, can actually act even before the bigger projects will come. So we develop state-of-the-art decision support tool with an exclusive focus on affordability and accessibility. So basically, to summarize, we were saying that for our disaster risk reduction and management practices and strategies to work to become effective, they should be affordable. So the tools, the skills should be open source, basic, and should be proactive. It is accessible, meaning it can be operated locally, customizable, and scalable. Of course, it also depends on the size of the city that we are working on. And the decision support, the risk we should understand, very importantly, contextualized and communicated. That's why there was also a session on risk communication during the workshop. And hopefully we can do a better, more efficient risk reduction, risk management for risk managers. So that's why we did this training. It's basically a week long training together with our friends here present and our local practitioners, local engineers, local resilient or disaster resilient managers and planners, including the Department of Science and Technology, and of course, the academe was also included here. So we trained with the decision support tool. And we ended up with a forum inviting a larger audience so that other stakeholders can take part, can also pitch in their idea on how they are able to use, to appreciate the tools and the results that we demonstrated. And these are just some of the comments of the participants. One was saying that it is important for us local resilience practitioners to understand, localize, and apply this learning in advocating resilience in the local community. The other one is a geologist saying that the fact that you can get a fragility curve and vulnerability function just from a taxonomical scale is very helpful. It cuts costs and saves time. This will be explained by Asana a little later. And the regional director of the Office of Civil Defense was also saying that engineering solutions that are consistent, the provisions of the code is very important. And one of the city planners saying that housing, not only schools, he challenged us that housing must also adopt this kind of tool. So, but of course, we also dedicated a half day, I think, or another day for the future engineers. So these are the students. Very importantly, they are the next generation of practitioners. So we have to start them young. And so very quickly, I will go to a bit of the risk profile. Why is this very much applicable, practical, and useful for Cagayan de Oro City? The two main documents that we used was the local DRRM plan and the climate and disaster risk assessment report. So basically, in the report, it was highlighted that floods and rain and rain-induced landslides in particular. That's why Jared will also share about landslide a little later. And then another report saying other than floods and landslides, earthquakes are also important or relevant hazards in the city. As you know, Philippines is located in a very seismically active area. In the last 2 weeks, you've seen reports. These are our earthquakes. The bigger ones are also mapped here. And Cagayan de Oro, by the way, is somewhere here. So we are not exempt from the shaking from the last week, or last 2 weeks, basically. So we are still even experiencing a bit of tremor this week. So we have done a lot. No, the city has actually done a lot, but more on the qualitative description and characterization of our vulnerability, and that is, I think, very important. And this is in other than earthquake, we are also prone to typhoons, as you know, and to floods. We have a deadly flood a few years back. And these are the schools, for example, and these are the flood footprints. So where the hazards are, the exposed elements, for example, are there. I can just a random map. We actually did a lot of geohazard risk mapping in the city. This is, for example, for critical facilities, including schools. It says here that this is the flood, and these are the exposed facilities, and these are the vulnerability of these facilities, and these are the resulting risk. Same is true for roads, which Jiyun will actually include in the analysis and the connectivity of schools. So these are roads, for example, and bridges, exposure, vulnerability, and risk. And finally, on landslide, again, so you see almost everywhere in the city is landslide prone. And then here, with roads and bridges, in terms of landslide and risk. So basically, if we go dive deep to the report, most of the parameters used in the analysis by the city or by the local government is on qualitative and governance related, management related, which is very important. However, what we offer in this project is, as we say, qualitative assessment is important because stories matter. But quantitative or more engineering assessment can also offer added value, problem focused, and we hope to be solutions driven that is accessible and affordable. And systems approach in social parameters, we always hear that, but also in physical, structural, functional parameters, which June will demonstrate a little later. I think that's all from me. Thank you very much. I think it's Asana's next.
Yeah. Thank you, Dexter. Thank you for the very, very nice introduction to our project. Let me start with sharing my screen. I hope you're able to see the screen. Is that okay? Yeah. Hi. Thank you, Dexter, again. Thank you, Jared, Leonard. Thank you for this platform where we're sharing our research and funded through the IPUR project. As Dexter mentioned, in this presentation, we'll look at the quantitative risk assessment tools that we employed through on this project, which has been developed with the UNESCO Chair in Disaster Risk Reduction and Resilience Engineering over the past several years. So in this project, we bring them together with the system resilience and system performance tool that June will be explaining a bit later. So if we look at the overall picture of the problem that we are looking at, we have several assets that are facilitating the delivery of education after a hazard occurrence. So for instance, here you see you have school infrastructure, the buildings and associated critical infrastructure such as road networks, which should function as we designed them for, so that we're able to deliver education as quickly as possible after a hazard event. And a third component is the community that uses the schools that come into picture. And we understand this concept of vulnerability, exposure, and hazard as the contributors or the three main pillars of the risk. Hazard, as Dexter just showed, we understand as the likelihood of experiencing different hazard intensities at different locations. And we have very well developed hazard maps, for example, for different hazards in the region. Exposure, on the other hand, it gives us the exposure to the extent of infrastructure that is exposed to these hazards. So this is with respect to the location, the quantity, and the physical infrastructure elements. The third one, the vulnerability model, which we will be explaining a bit more in this presentation, it shows us the likelihood of damage or loss at a given or for a given hazard intensity for a given asset. So there are also existing models like the global earthquake model with respect to the earthquakes, for example. So we will look at four topics that were covered during the training workshop in a very brief and quick manner in this short presentation. A bit more detail on the exposure characterization using the GLOSI approach and the analytical seismic risk assessment through fragility and vulnerability. We will briefly look at the transportation network and the flood risk of schools. So the GLOSI taxonomy, which is short for Global Library of School Infrastructure, this was developed as part of the Global Program for Safer Schools. It's an initiative by the World Bank and in association with University College London and Uni Andis. This taxonomy was developed that classifies school buildings based on a set of parameters. So mainly, there are 12. Am I still audible? Yeah. Okay, so there are mainly 12 parameters. The first three being the main structural system, like things like the reinforced concrete, masonry, steel structures. The second, the height range, the number of stories, and the third, the seismic design level. These contribute to the main or primary parameters which characterize the building type. And then the remaining 9 parameters are the secondary parameters which distinguish between buildings in the same building type. And if you are then going to do a very detailed analysis of a building, you would then need a geometry and material properties, which are called the intrinsic parameters. So if you can, this resource is freely available on the World Bank GLOSI website. And we have, under the UNESCO chair, we have also provided a 2-day course, which is freely available to access on our website, which details this methodology in great detail with hands-on examples and so on. So all of these parameters, as I explained, they have a set of defined attributes. Say, for example, the height range can be low rise, mid rise, high rise, depending on the number of stories and the number of typology. So the LMB here, the load bearing masonry, RC are the reinforced concrete. So these are the 2 typologies that are covered currently under GLOSI and which is also being expanded. So all of these parameters are defining a particular attribute of a building that contributes to its seismic performance. So by identifying these attributes of all of these 12 parameters, we can then generate a taxonomy string, which is characteristic to that particular building. So in the workshop, what we did was, we provided the information on this particular methodology and encouraged how we can collect this information on a visual survey. And then we did a field survey to one of the schools Dexter mentioned, the East City Central School, where the team surveyed at least 2 school buildings to gather this kind of alphanumeric string, which is representative of the typology. So what we can then do once we have a typology is to then classify and categorize the buildings in the whole portfolio. So if you apply this to the entire population of school buildings in Cagayan de Oro, and based on only the first 3 parameters, we get a distribution as shown here on the right, up, top left, right. And then the idea is to then match our predominant typologies to some of the given typologies in the GLOSI database, such as the one on the middle, which can then use an existing fragility function, which is developed for that particular typology. So these resources are all freely available. So once you are able to identify the typology, you are then able to map it to a complete fragility assessment of the building. What is fragility is basically the expression of probability that a level of damage will be exceeded given a hazard intensity. So there are several guidelines that are developed for this. So the one here we are referring to is the GEM, or the Global Earthquake Model Analytical Vulnerability Assessment Guidelines, where we look at a particular index building, which is a representative building that we identified through the taxonomy. And then we choose a model type, say a simple 1D model or a very complicated model. Depending on the computational expense we have, we are affordable, and then also the skill levels and the time that we have at hand. So once we have such a model, we can then define the damage states, which is the third step in the process of fragility and vulnerability derivation, where we understand different operational levels. So for example, the building is still operational, very slight damage is the first state. In the immediate occupancy, we expect slight damage, but it's still very much easy to repair and be usable very quickly. At life safety, we assume there is no threat to life, even though the building has much more damage. And at collapse prevention, the building is no more safe to occupy. So once we define the damage states, we can then choose an analysis type depending again on the type of complexity that we want to go into. So for example, you can start from very low complex models like nonlinear static methods, pseudodynamic methods, such as pushover, or go to very complex nonlinear dynamic methods like incremental dynamic analysis. So pushover analysis, for instance, is a very simple and often very frequently used method where we have a model of a structure which we push until the end of its capacity to produce something called a capacity or a pushover curve, where we plot the base shear versus the roof displacement, which in combination with a method, as we would discuss here, can generate a fragility function. So as I said, we have the capacity curve that comes from the model analysis. And then in combination with a set of earthquake records, either synthetic or real earthquake records, we can plot the demand and capacity in the same space, such as the acceleration displacement spectrum, where we can then plot and see where your demand lands in terms or in reference to the demand. So your capacity versus demand can be visualized here, as you see, as a performance point. And if you repeat this exercise for any number of ground motions and scale it to the level that we can also obtain some collapses, we produce a cloud of performance points, which can then be regressed to produce fragility function. So this gives us the probability of exceeding 4 damage states in this particular figure for a given range of hazard intensities. So once we have the fragility function, we can go into vulnerability function, which gives the likelihood of losses for a particular building. So for example, here we have at a given intensity, the probabilities of occurrence of all 4 damage states can be mapped as shown in the bar chart here, which can then be convolved together with the cost associated with repair or addressing the needs at that damage state to produce what are the expected losses. So this vulnerability function is a one single function that represents the losses associated with the 4 fragility curves that are shown here on the right. So this is the basic idea of the fragility derivation, and we can use it as shown here. As you can see in the retrofitted structure on the bottom, you get better capacity, better fragility functions that are shifting to the right, and lower losses as shown by the vulnerability function. And in terms of the road network and infrastructure, we looked at the network of roads that connect the schools and also the network of roads that connect neighborhoods to each of the schools. So we identified these bridges and their typologies with the help of the Xavier University survey team, and identified their fragility functions from literature as well. We did one of the site visits to these bridges and identify the typology in the time during our workshop as well. And the last component is a flood function, flood vulnerability. So similar to the GLOSI taxonomy, we have a set of parameters that identify the building vulnerability to floods, not just in terms of the building properties, but also the surroundings. So these can then be assigned certain rankings. So the vulnerability rating as shown here, which can then become summed up to produce what is a vulnerability index for one building. So if you have several buildings, you can then produce a cumulative vulnerability function in terms of the vulnerability indices. And together with other factors such as the depth damage functions, which show what is the expected depth for a building at a given water depth, we can then calculate estimated economic losses, which also depends on the replacement cost of the structure for a particular region, particular country, and also the area of the building. So this would be the application of this particular PARNASSUS approach, which we haven't expanded much on the workshop. So with this, these two methods, we gathered feedback, and people, as Dexter mentioned also, they found it very useful that we can just identify a structure and then go to fragility and vulnerability analysis, which is cost saving and time saving. We also got the feedback that these tools can be customized for local terminology and construction types. Also to give a usable platform such as a mobile application, which is much more user friendly, and also such tools can be developed for post-disaster damage assessment. And as the next steps, we are now expanding GLOSI taxonomy to include multi-hazard considerations and also improving user interface through ready-to-use tools such as the one that you see on the right. I think that's all from me. Thank you very much for your time. I pass on to Darren.
Hey, hello, hi everyone. So let me share my slides. Yeah, can you see my screen? Yes, great. Okay. Hello, hi, good afternoon. So I'd like to spend the next 10 minutes sharing about geotechnical risks. So at Cagayan de Oro, the major geotechnical hazards is landslides. It has several divisions. The divisions called barangays. Okay, so and they are situated, and many of these districts are situated in the mountainous and hilly terrains, such as towards the south, towards the west, and the east of the region. So out of these 80 barangays, 25 of them are susceptible to rainfall-induced landslides. 15 susceptible to earthquake-induced landslides, and these are all based on the city government's report. And during the workshops and the forums to the participants coming from the government, from the NGOs, from the tertiary, the institutions, the different types of landslides were discussed, as well as along with with their relative size, range, the velocity of travel, the triggering mechanisms, the consequences, as well as the mitigations measures. So basically what I did was to make use of case studies such as the well-documented the 1972 Poshan Road landslide in Hong Kong. And these were all being adapted to demonstrate the phenomenon of landslide development over time under intense rainfall. So telltale signs such as cracks and settlements near the top of the slopes, tilting retaining walls, trees, or lampposts, as well as water seeping out from the ground. All of these do offer early warnings that community can infer and take actions before a landslide occur. The differences between rainfall and earthquake-induced landslides were also being demonstrated, illustrated through these videos, such as the ones being shown here. Well, so in short, rainfall-induced landslides developed progressively, whereas for earthquake-induced ones are sudden. Okay, as what you can see from this cartoon. The triggering mechanisms were also being shared. The slope fails when it gets wet, leading to the weakening of the shear strength. And this is in the case of rainfall-induced landslides, while the earthquake-induced landslides once destabilizes loose particles near to the surface of the slopes. We also talk about the characteristics of these landslides to provide the technical context of such geotechnical failures. Rainfall-induced landslides, they occur more often, but they are more predictable. And hence, you see that two differences of the landslides in terms of likelihood as well as the severity. We have also given greater details of what causes the occurrence of the landslides more in detail during those workshops. We also talk about the driving forces as well as the resisting forces, whereby if the driving forces are greater than the resisting ones, then a landslide is likely to occur. We also make use of simple diagrams such as this, whereby the weakening of the soil under moisture could be demonstrated. As you can see over here, the pouring of the dry sand leads to a very natural angle of repulse. In the presence of some moisture in the sand, we are able to create sand castles, okay, that we have made back then when we were a child, into a much steeper gradient of the sand, and this is attributed to the surface tension, the suctions that attracts the particles together. However, in the event of rainfall-induced landslides, we are actually introducing more water, and by having more water into the system itself, we actually got rid of the suctions, which is created by all of these spaces, the gaps between the particles, and that would lead to the the weakening, okay, of the slopes, and hence therefore a landslide can happen. So so this idea is being brought over to the case of landslides, as you can see over here. And now we move on to the more formal training outcomes, okay, whereby we look into how that our participants are able to assess geotechnical risks. We train them how to collect background data, and that comprises of the topographical, the geological, the hydrological, the vegetation cover, etc. We also guided them on how to identify telltale signs of slope instability, as well as how to test the ground for its strength, its moisture, and other properties. We also share how these numerical tools can actually be used to assess slope stability, as well as looking into the role of drainage control to ensure that water do not accumulate inside the ground. That will lead to the softening of the soil, and hence creating the landslide itself. We also talk about the mitigation measures in the form of artificial the reinforcements, be it whether if you are talking about the retaining walls, geotextiles, or even soil nails. We also talk about the natural methods such as the use of vegetation, or as a means of erosion control as well, to ensure that the soil is being strengthened by the roots of this grass, as well as avoiding the accumulations of water in the soil. We also guided them on the good land use planning, as well as emergency preparedness, as well as public education awareness in the form of posters that can be widely available to them, to the communities. During the field trip, the participants had to get their hands dirty by performing what was being taught, and to record information in forms like this. They have to conduct some field tests, as well as to record observations to complete these forms, as well as asking them to take photos of some telltale signs, that can signify the possibility of of the ground which is about to give way. Okay, and the following are some of the slides of the conditions of the slopes in the regions, as well as the slopes that our participants took samples and conducted some testings on the ground. So basically, their role was to take samples, was to identify the type of soil, was to conduct some testings to obtain the strength of the soil. And these are some photos taken that shows the participants in actions. And you can see that they are having a good time, although that it is under very hot sunny weather. And last but not least, a good job well done to them for completing their tasks. They have also performed calculations. They provided some photos and some descriptions. And at the end, trainers like myself, as well as the participants, we came together, we penned concluding thoughts to consolidate their learnings. And overall, it was a very fruitful experience for both the participants and for myself. And we're really grateful to for IPUR for this opportunity to be able to contribute to the community. Thank you. Yeah, so I'll pass on to Beyond to share the slides.
Thank you, Darren. I will share my screen. So I was in charge of the last day, which which we intended to deliver a decision support tool for this connected infrastructure. So the session for this resilience assessment of connected infrastructure network was delivered on the final day of the training, building on the preceding materials. And the idea was to present this end-to-end risk assessment by using this example of transport and school networks, extending on the prior sessions by Asana and Darren on identifying the fragility curves of individual structures and how we can analyze the hazard risks as well. Then we worked on and the second part was on the risk communication workshop, where we tried to elicit and discuss risk awareness and risk perception to co-develop actionable insights, since the attendees were, after all, the experts themselves, being the government officials in the Philippines, being in charge of the hazard risk management. So the first part was about this delivering this technical aspect of risk assessment and mapping. So the objective were to understand the risk assessment tools and to enable stakeholders to apply these risk maps for practical decision making. So it consisted of two parts. The first part was about lecture on probability modeling and risk assessment of network infrastructure, which most attendees were not very familiar with. And then on the second part, we moved on to the hands-on tutorial, for which we used Jupyter notebooks for Python computation and visualization. And we also used Google Colab to simplify the setup issues and ensure consistent versions. So this was the example that we delivered, where, as Asana just showed, there were 7 major schools with 5 bridges that connect these schools to the nearby places. And the objective was to understand the risk in the connectivity of these schools to nearby places, which are dependent on first the structural health of these school buildings and also the bridges that connect these schools to the nearby places. So this was the outcome that we came to, where we computed the disconnectivity schools for each school, and we visualized the spatial distribution of the risk, where we can clearly see the spatial distribution of these risks between schools. And the training outcomes it was encouraging to see the strong engagement with the hands-on workflow and mapping output from the attendees, even though the technical aspects were very unfamiliar to them. But we also found that theory components were informative but less impactful for practitioner audiences. So what the takeaway lesson here we learned was we need to prioritize applied exercises more while keeping the theory more concise and tightly coupled to the actionable tasks. So this was the snippet of the Python code that we developed as a part of the training, which involved modeling the uncertainty models for its structure and hazard risk. And it also included the inference algorithm so that we can map the risk. And despite all these technical difficulties, we had this very good participant from all the attendees with all their laptop ready. And the second part was about this risk communication, where we intended to convey the theoretical background on the common decision metrics that they could use for decision making, such as expected loss and downtime, alongside the dependence between risk awareness, perception, and preparedness. And we also try to elicit the insights for effective communication and preparedness from the stakeholders from their experiences with community engagement. And so the format was, we first briefly delivered the technical primer, and we conducted a live poll of participants on communication modalities and responsibility sharing. And finally, we had an open discussion on how we can tailor the message for policymakers and the public, and also in the context of Cagayan de Oro or the Philippines. So this was one of the example responses where we asked about their preferred way of communicating quantitative analysis results with both policymakers and the public. And they could suggest their own preferred means, and they could also vote the proposed means so that we can measure like the general preferences. So the findings from this live poll was generally there was high preferences towards these maps and visuals, followed by summary statistics, translated materials, short animation, and town hall meetings. And there were also this repeated recurrence of this the necessity of these translated materials, which is very specific to the Philippines, where which has a highly diverse local language landscape. And there was also this clear consensus that the communication should be different between with policymakers and with the public, since policymakers should be more decision ready and metric heavy, which is also related to what Dax mentioned about the importance of quantitative results. And with the public, it should be more plain language and through visuals for better understanding. And for responsibility sharedness, there was a general consensus that on shared responsibility, even though the responsibility is the majority is shared by the government. However, we note that all the attendees were from government offices, so this result might change if we survey different participant profiles. So in conclusion, it was encouraging to see this highly receptive participation by the stakeholders, even though the technical aspects were quite unfamiliar. And we also found this importance of hands-on workflows, and we also could also have a glimpse on the communication preferences from these local government, local officials. And as for next steps, we are thinking about running a training as a co-development process for risk with stakeholders, which may so that since a training workshop is a very short time, intense interaction, to transition this short-term training to community uptake, a well-defined training that we reframe the training materials as a co-development of risk tools that they can use as a draft of their future risk tools could be an effective way that we actually achieve this community uptake despite the limited resources of training. On the other hand, we are also thinking about opening some selected co-creation activities to the public so that we could have these risk tools have more relevance and uptake by the broader community, because when it comes to disaster risk, every one of our community is a stakeholder. And that's me. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that really comprehensive and insightful presentation. Thank you again to all our four speakers. Okay, so we have about 10 minutes left for some Q&A. I can see that there are several questions that have come in, and thank you so much, Dexter, for addressing one of the questions on the feedback that you have received from the workshop participants. So in case everyone has missed it, so the question pertains to what feedback the workshop participants have given on the usefulness and the value of the training. And so if for those of you who would like to check out some of the feedback, Dr. Loh has actually provided a link that you can check out. Okay, so a couple of other questions have come in. So let me try my best to summarize a couple of these questions and to see if our speakers have any responses that they would like to share in response to those questions. So one of the questions pertain to the content of the training program, right? So these member of the audience would like to find out within the training program itself, to what extent do participants also learn about ways to apply risk management governance-oriented decisional tools based on things like causal loop mental model mappings, root cause analysis, as well as scenario planning based extrapolative projections, right? So I'll stop there because there are actually quite a lot of details that this particular participant would like to find out, right? So would any of the speakers like to comment on this particular question? Yeah.
If I may, since it seems like it is related to how we can visualize this distribution of the risks and how this could be communicated with the various sectors. So we believe, and this is the future direction that we are going forward, is risk mapping, because we believe there is a great potential that this can facilitate communication and effective decision making. But risk mapping is at its initial stage in the sense that from the research wise, it is doable. But from the practical point of view, there's many challenges that we need to address for actual penetration, including the data demand and the tool's stability in terms of computation. Then there is this, and I guess the name is Shi Hui, raised this important issue that how then this risk visuals could have to be designed, because risk communication is a very sensitive area. And this is really something that has not been researched yet, that how we should visualize, what we should visualize, and what is safe to visualize and disseminate to the public. So this kind of soft aspect of risk mapping, not the technical part, is something that we need to that we need more research on. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you so much, Dr. Byun. So another follow-up question from this particular member of the audience is, could you also speak a little bit about the use of risk analytics in your risk evaluation software programs and infographic presentations? Yeah. So would you like to comment a little bit on that as well?
Right. By risk analytics, you mean what does risk analytics mean?
So essentially, these researcher said that the risk analytics is defined as a specialized subspecialty, or I guess it's a subspecialty of data analytics that looks specifically at analytics. I suppose is targeted towards like risk assessment. Yeah.
Right. So sorry, what was the question? Sorry, what was the question?
Okay. So let me just read out the question.
Yeah.
So the member of the audience has further defined risk analytics as follows, right? So it's a data-driven process using statistical tools, big data, and techniques like artificial intelligence to identify, measure, predict, and manage potential risks that could impact an organization's objectives. So by transforming raw data into actionable risk intelligence, organizations can make more informed decisions, proactively mitigate threats, and enhance their strategic agility and resilience across various sectors, including finance, cybersecurity. So that's the definition of analytics. Yeah, so I think the member of the audience would like to know to what extent. Okay, so I do understand why this might be clear, because the question like this, is it about the course or is it about like the content of your presentation, right? So to what extent? Okay, I guess maybe let's take it as to what extent does your course also cover the use of risk analytics? Or do you also talk, or can you talk a little bit more about the use of risk analytics in your risk evaluation software programs?
All right. Yeah, so how we came up with this map. So the map is a set of this risk assessment of multiple systems. So what we did was for each school, we defined a system event where the students cannot use a facility either because of this connectivity in transport or the damage of the school infrastructure. And so then we ran 7 risk assessment or risk analytics over these 7 schools. And then we simply just mapped out these risks we using color code. So usually these maps just include what is an output of multiple system event analysis or risk analytics. Yes. Thank you for the question. Yeah.
Jack, would you like to add to what Dr. Byun just said? Yeah.
Yeah, let me just add, just jump in and just share a bit. I think the data, the analytics aspects of risk analytics is just a small section. If I were to interpret it in this manner, in a sense, because when it comes to talk about risk, that you look at to identify the risk, you assess it, you quantify it, and then thereafter, with all of this information, then you do your modeling, your data analysis, and then you look at your risk modeling, and then thereafter, you monitor your risk, and then you make certain decisions. So I think what this question from the audience is talking about is more on the data analysis, the modeling aspects. In terms of, well, for example, earthquake-induced landslides, right? So, where basically then that falls into what we call as catastrophe modeling, which we look into, on the probability, and the severity, as well as to predict the damage caused by earthquake, for example, to buildings, to where it's mainly driven towards the building, whereby there are more data to it, and to do, for example, like Monte Carlo kind of simulations, some machine learning that can be applied. For sure that these are some of the tools that behind the scenes, when we do our research, we will bring that in. During the workshop itself, basically is that our analysis has encompassed that in order to create these tools, which are more kind of, more affordable, more accessible, and basically when we do that, that means it has to be a much more simplified approach of bringing that framework to our participants, and that's what that we have done. So, basically, so in short is that, to the question is that yes, indeed, that we have considered that as part of our analysis, and that's the reason why that we applied for this grant, and we want to bring our research outputs into practice. So for sure that we have done that. For example, even for the fragility curves that Dr. Asana has shared, all of this would involve statistical kind of modeling in order to get to that stage. I hope that helps to clarify some of these doubts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Darren. Yeah, okay. So thanks again to all our speakers for this great presentation, as well as for all the questions from members of the audience. So unfortunately, we're out of time, but I think as everyone has actually witnessed, right? So from the comments, from the participants' feedback, as well as from the discussion this afternoon, right? So there certainly seemed to be much interest and demand in such training. And so we thank the researchers, this team of researchers, for developing this accessible and affordable tools, as well as for conducting the training for these tools, right? So as what Dr. Byun has indicated in her response to one of the questions, there will be more training opportunities as well as occasions. So please do stay tuned on their LinkedIn feeds. And if anyone has any further questions on these tools or on these training programs or any suggestions, please feel free to reach out to Asana, June, Darren, or Dexter, right? And so thank you once again for attending this seminar, and please do stay tuned for future webinars that IPUR is planning to bring to you, right? Have a good afternoon. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Leonard.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you,
Have a good
everyone.
rest of the day. Yeah. Thank you.
Bye-bye.